Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon, co-author with Peter Vale of the digital book on Practice as a Way of Being. Find it at mylibrary.world. And now to our show. Well, folks, I introduced Mark Bradford as a researcher. You'll see other aspects of his credentials as collegiate and otherwise, but I said, I think you're a researcher. Then I realized at the end of this conversation that he is a full-time, all-wheel drive researcher of how people get along in this world, and he uses the experience and the lenses and the perspective of Aikido, which is an ancient Japanese martial art. But as he's walking down the street or if he's having a conversation with me across several thousands of miles, I get the feeling that he's in a constant fluid motion of grasping and sometimes letting go and grasping some more. And we built this conversation together about what he is discovering, and I'm discovering what he is discovering. That is, to me, that's the kind of researching that's going to give us the most monumentally different ideas about how to get along with each other in organizations, leading and otherwise. I just have that feeling. And he's far younger than I am, so he's got quite a few years ahead to make that come through in whatever new media is out there. With me, podcasting was new to me, and I've got a lot of my ideas out on podcasting. Who knows what Mark will be doing other than traditional publishing, but I know it's going to be different, and it's going to be engaging, and it's going to make us feel better as human beings. So here is Mark Bradford from Auckland, New Zealand. Well, folks, I happen to be wandering around the world in my imagination, and I thought, New Zealand, wow, what a fascinating place. And in New Zealand, at this very moment, having a conversation with me is Mark Bradford. Now, I am kidding, as I usually do in these introductions. I discovered Mark in a Prometheus webcast a few weeks ago, as he was talking about his interest in, particularly in leadership and certain ways of building practical theories of leadership. And I'm fascinated and eager to follow up, which I did, and he has, and here we are. So Mark has many things, and you'll be able to read in his profile what they are. But I think in particular, I want to point out that his practice is researcher. Now, here's why I want to underline that. It's not because some academy has said you must do research. It's not just because, some agency has said you do some research for us. I think, Mark, I'm guessing, but I think that you are a researcher by nature, that you like to look into things quite deeply. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I did I don't know whether you know the School of Life. You heard of them? Yeah, there was a book called How to Change the World that I picked up 10 years ago, and in it, I was reading it, and it was very interesting, and I got to the section, and the author said, before you go any further, I want you to do an exercise to learn something about yourself. And I went, okay, and then I turned the page, and on the other page it said, no, I want you to stop, and I want you to do this exercise.
Boy, that's clever publishing.
It was great, right?
Yeah.
And it was called What Drives You. And I thought it was fascinating. It was literally, you had to go back into your life all the way from yesterday back 10 years and work out kind of key moments and then analyze them just simply through a pretty simple why sort of strategy. And out of that came 5 things that drove me in life. And one of them is what drives me in life is people that are endlessly curious. I always get on with these people. And I think probably that's because I probably am as well. And
yeah, I think so.
And my father, probably as well as an inventor, was always is still at 86, is still inventing things, and we're always curious. And I think with something like a martial art, it also lends to it as well, because it's as Paul mentioned at the last podcast. So I think it was one of the guests. He talked about how many layers or how deep you can go when you go into a martial art. And it really depends on how much you want to dive in and what beach in the world. I mean, he gave this sort of a couple of metaphors for the depth, or you can just treat it as a fitness thing. But what I loved about Aikido was it was incredibly rich, and it was less about hitting somebody, but it was that self-discovery, the self-reflection, think about who you are as a person as you travel through the world. And it's a puzzle that you never can finish.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I never had the patience to finish a puzzle anyway. Even the simplest ones when I was a kid. And I can remember right off the top of my head, my brother, who was very meticulous, who was a lawyer when he grew up, but he would say, "No, you can't leave a piece." I said, "No, I think I've got it now. I don't need to do any more." He drove him nuts, but it's because I wanted to get to a different puzzle or another event. So I think that kind of lovely restlessness is great. But when Aikido is, I thought I could learn a little bit more of it after I heard you talk about it on that Prometheus broadcast. And the idea that it's not really in layers in a way. It's sort of like an organic hole into which you can plunge and just keep stroking and stroking. And yet the nice thing about practice writ large is that you go for results. You want accomplishment. You want goal attainment so much, particularly in whatever the swim you're in is taking you to, that you'll just keep going. And in the martial arts, as little as I know about it, there's so many measured moments, including achieving belts, in the different colors and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's got a wonderful combination of structure and discipline on the one hand, but in the moment that you're actually performing, it's completely by chance how it all comes out. So,
yeah, I think that's true, and I'm glad you're in terms of your puzzles. Just touching on that briefly, my partner does puzzles, and she's the one that grinds her way through to the end, and then sort of almost gives up, and then I come and finish them off. But I'm not interested in the first bit. What's interesting about what you're saying about practice and processes, I found it really confusing. Doing a martial art, I'm very uncoordinated, and that makes it hard. When I saw a research paper that had analyzed Aikido and ballet and worked out that Aikido was only slightly less difficult, and I thought, what the hell am I doing? I can hardly roll around on the ground. And if somebody says, "Mark, why don't you take up ballet?" I would have gone, "You got to be," no, I would have laughed them out of the room. And here I was struggling. And I suppose from an Eastern point of view, which is I also find quite fascinating, is if we compare it to a Western sort of view, and in my project more specifically about creativity at that stage, because it was really, I was focusing on what can I take from the mat and use in a creative setting, because no one's done that. And that was what I did for the doctorate. And what was interesting was that in a Western sense, it's about being, or like having to finish something or come up with lots of ideas. And in an Eastern sense, it's more about becoming. It's the process or the practice of maybe you never get to this point. And I think I'm kind of comfortable that every time I try something, my project evolves. And I think it's incredibly rewarding if you don't get frustrated with the fact that you may have to go on a path where this is quite a different type of experience. There's no start or end at this sense. It's for life. And path is a good way to think about it, or path or a way of life.
Yeah. When Peter and I spoke to each other about the titling of this manuscript and this ultimately the book, he had written a book back in early 2000s called Learning as a Way of Being. It's a wonderful book. And I said, well, Peter, now you've got me thinking deeply about practice. I think practice is more than just a way of being. It's a way of becoming. We called it way of being. But to your point, what I just heard you saying is the more you do delve in, either in some kind of a trajectory of a planned nature, or if you take a couple of side trips, but you delve, you say, I'm going to get into this and see where I end up, not caring if there's such a thing as floundering and failing. See, to me, that makes us different people, and maybe even better people than had we done none of that. Or if we said to the outside world, come in and make me something, give me a PhD so I can be considered smart. Now, you earned a PhD and so did I, but I get smart by doing the things like delving into this podcasting adventure for the last 3 years. So I get it. I really do. The physical challenge, it's kind of beyond me now, but in order for you to have gotten first experience in Aikido, you had to actually be trained and be on the mat and all of that. And as you were doing that, did you have this sort of parallel idea that you were going to learn something that you could apply to organizational life and leadership, or did it just emerge as you were doing that year after year?
Have you done a martial art or anything like that?
I tried some judo when I was young. I didn't like falling down and hitting the floor.
That's not going to be good then, is it?
No.
Well, it's an interesting. We've talked about the words, being and to be and becoming. And one of my supervisors also broke the word becoming up into 3 pieces, because being is bookends becoming as well. And so I have a drawing in the thesis of the spiral, and he had a spiral and he broke the word becoming into it. And so everything spirals and loops with me. And there's another one which I would say is love and like. And I was just talking to a leadership consultant just before this, and I was telling her the story about how when I first took up Aikido in Melbourne, I didn't like it. I didn't really enjoy it. In fact, the thing I enjoyed the most was how you had to clean the dojo before and after class. And there was one thing that happened at the end where you swept through the dojo and down the staircase and at the width of the door to the gutter. That was the thing I liked most.
That was the custom. That was a requirement. Clean the dojo.
Yeah. So when you come in, we sweep the world out, really, I suppose. And when I was over there, I was a bit terrified of doing it. I always loved Kung Fu, the TV program, and we've all seen Steven Seagal, and he used 13% of his stuff on his movies as Aikido, I found out. Mm-hmm. And where I worked at this global integrator, I would meet people as I talked about it, and they would talk about what they did and what they got out of it, and they would suggest things. And then one of my bosses did Kendo for Australia. So he was an Australian, and he fought for Australia. And we would talk together about what he would learn, and I'd started practicing about how this would be so useful for the workplace. And we'd go to lunch and talk about this. But the big key was really transfer, the gold is transfer. And so for most leadership development, for example, or taking the ideas from the mat, or taking ideas from somewhere else and applying it, it's, most of the time it doesn't work. And especially in leadership development, it's like 98% failure. And
yeah,
so
but that 2% is what we celebrate.
That's what we want. And I came to New Zealand, and I thought, I didn't think about doing my PhD in Aikido. I just happened to think, well, I will try doing Aikido. I need to do something. So I went to a dojo. I found an instructor and said, that's great. Told the Melbourne instructor, and he said, no, you need to visit every dojo, and then you make your decision. So these are all little processes.
Yeah.
And so I did all 14. There was 11 different styles of Aikido in Wellington, and I chose one which ironically was 20 meters away from my office on the campus, and bizarre. And I practiced for a long time, and then I started doing the doctorate, etc. And so there's two parts. One is I'll just write that down. One is so I went to one of these sessions that I went to try and work out whether this is my dojo. It was out of town, about an hour, and I did the session. And before the session, the instructor said, what's your greatest fear? And I said, probably getting attacked by multiple people. And he said, okay. So we trained, and at the end, you're all kneeling on the mat. And as we were kneeling on the mat, he went into the center of the mat, and he invited 5 black belts on, and requested that they attack him. And so they did. And it was great. And so they would come at him, and he would deal with them. He would, move away, evade, sort of get them in grips and drop them to the ground, throw them. And he just always was in the center of the mat. And I thought, this is fascinating. Perhaps there's a project in this, make this like brainstorming, but just using your body. And that was where the project started, was maybe there's a project in there. And so when I first started, I wasn't sure. I mean, I'd come to do another type of project in the doctorate, but I just thought that this would be cool.
Yeah, that's the researcher in you right there. That was the one. The researcher said, I could be told to do a paper on X, but I am experiencing Y, and I've got a feeling it's new, it's novel, and maybe I'll go down that way for a bit. And that'll happen on the mat.
Yeah, that's right. And
that
I suppose,
insight.
By that time you've read a wee bit, and I had done a couple of years, and I'd been thinking of the idea of being percolating, but then it only just fell into place in that illuminative moment where things like Tetris, things fall into place, and you go,
yes.
again. And so I have quite a few Tetris moments on the project. And so I did the doctorate. And I think and I thought about these things all the time. The other thing that was interesting was when I had finished my research on Aikido, which was for a year and a half, 160 sessions, quite rigorously, I was increasing my grading, and they were starting to tap me on the shoulder to go to brown belt and all that sort of stuff. And I was starting to think, I'm so uncoordinated. I don't know whether this is for me. And so the doctorate was saying, you need to spend time on the doctorate. The Aikido instructor saying, you need to come 5 nights a week. And I had a family, right? And the family's going, hey, we're here too. And so I had to make a judgment about what do I do. And so I was at a film festival on Allen Ginsberg, the poet.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of solved it for me. He sort of talked about, it's the same feeling as I was having about Aikido, which was, I liked doing Aikido, but I loved what I was learning through practicing it.
Beautiful.
So I think that's another one between love the difference between just doing something, or do and do. It's very easy to trot out let's do this, but actually these are very immediate things. They take time. For me, it takes a long time to percolate. And I think you've got to choose something that if you're lucky enough, and I've been very lucky to do a doctorate on something that I loved and still love, because it's intriguing, as you mentioned before, it keeps you going. You're curious, and I think probably the frustrating thing, but also kind of because of who we are, we probably like the challenge, is that I get frustrated if I ask my supervisor now. I'm finding it frustrating. I imagine she would say the same thing she said when I'd finished the doctorate and I started practicing beyond the thesis, and she would say, "It's hard because no one's done it."
But that was the original idea of doctoral level study. It was original. Do something original.
Yeah,
sort
exactly.
of got here in the States. My impression is it got kind of diluted in terms of people just wanting to get the piece of paper so they could move on, and so they took sort of the safest route. But one of the things that impressed me when I heard you talking about it a few weeks ago was, hey, I've never heard of anything like this, and I'm the one who's constantly whining about why can't we get fresh thinking on leadership. Everyone since the beginning of time has talked about it, written about it, but I'm still hearing the same stuff over and over again. And there you were percolating and then saying, I think I'm going to get this done. Now it's out there. What kind of reaction are you getting, if any? I mean, you know what you know now, and you know how much good it's done for you. But is there a way that this is getting out to the world?
Well, I was curious before I maybe go there. I was curious to ask you a question. Is that allowed? Yeah, I'm sure it is. So what if I asked you what's missing? What's missing?
Something that makes your heart beat faster. And when you read it, you go, that's it. That's what we're trying to say about how people move forward together in a particular context. And, when we talked a bit about love during the same Prometheus podcast, I had more of a feeling, now I haven't heard people talk about love and leadership in a while. Now I'm beginning to hear it. And we're doing it unabashedly. We're not talking about sexual love or anything. We're just talking about a kind of openness to experience and expressing what we're seeing as we're doing it, that you do because you care about each other. And so when you're going forward as a team or a department in a company or whatever, it's got that it's got the combination of what I heard you say a dojo had. On the one hand, tradition, structure, works on the clock, all the things that we'll find pretty much anywhere in business or in churches or anywhere else. On the other hand, the people who come there and grow because they love the art of Aikido. They're supporting each other. You may be out there battling for 10 minutes because it's prescribed, but then you step back and you bow. So there's that wonderful blend of that I would love to see translated into either some kind of a process that you can teach people or something in the real world. And I suspect you've been working on that.
I suppose I love what you were saying, and it's elusive. I think we just stuck on processes where we're told to turn up for training, or we big remit paper that goes on a shelf, or people, you feel like you've been there, done that, and so it's kind of this recycled sort of. It's like somebody with design thinking. When design, there's a lot of it's quite contestable at the moment. There's a lot of sort of anti and design thinking, but we still teach it here. My courses uses the systemic design framework from the Design Council in the UK, and it's a great flexible structure. And we break it, we hybridize it, and we sort of smash it up, and I'm sure that they just go, yeah, that's cool, whatever.
I better edit this out because the people in UK will be very upset. you New Zealanders, they're doing it again.
Doing it again. God damn it. The Americans
We had it perfect, and now they're down there breaking it up, playing with it. But that's great.
I think this mutual communication we used last time, and the idea of your heart beats faster. That's not my experience in any leadership context. Often it's a very sterile sit down, listen to me. It just uses all the things that you feel like we've moved past. You're trapped to a seat, or you're sitting in, you're in a meeting, or you've been told what to think, and there's no way of, and there's not equality in terms of the voices. And so what I really like is, the way you frame that, you said you move forward together. Well, that never happens in my experience, and I'd say the research says that as well. And certainly my research in terms of certainly has that definitely is kind of what I would be looking for, but a lot of leadership sort of paradigms, they're not interested in that. There's an imbalance in power, whereas in Aikido, the power equals to be able, and that's a reciprocal thing. That's we're both here, and we're, as a room, we're all here to learn from each other to be better. And I'm here to help you learn, and you're here to help me learn. And so it's 50-50. And I think that mutual communication is, it's just it's scary, I think, for a lot of organizations that have got
absolutely. The pairing would be dreadful for some people, particularly in hierarchical organizations. But when you said it, we're 50-50, we're here for each other's growth and gain. To me, that sounds new to my ear, and I love it. And I would say, okay, let's not calcify that into some kind of an article or a training regime right away. But here's a little bit, as I got to watch my clock on our time, but I want to do this all day, but my listeners tend to stop listening after about 30 minutes, but we're good. But here's the thing I wanted to throw out there. I find myself as an almost 81-year-old curmudgeon, when I hear about AI and it's coming and it's taking over, I want to fight it. I don't want to fight use of it. Let people use the hell out of it. But I want to fight for real intelligence, for human intelligence and humanity and humaneness and the things that no one can write software to do. And see, so the work I've always done since I was teaching kids swimming in the YMCA 70 years ago. So I want HI.
Nice.
And I think the Aikido experience you've had, very little technology, a whole lot of human intelligence at work, wouldn't you say? On the mat, a whole lot. And they haven't added any new technological features. And I'm guessing you wear a gi and you're barefoot, and you use your mind, and your strength, and your quickness, all the things that are human.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I love what you're saying there. I think the HI, I'll be riffing off that. I think one of the things that in education we have to think about and have to kind of have a response to is the encroachment of AI, and as you say, is to bring it in and to think about how it can work in with what we do. But one thing that I'm trying to think of the writer who wrote the book, but I cannot think, the New York Times writer on technology, slipped my mind, unfortunately. But he one of the things he said that this technology can't do is it doesn't have a humanness, which I think you're sort of talking about there, and also it can't do more than one thing at a time very well at the moment. It's really good at one thing, but what we want to do, or when you're creative as a person, is we want to sort of work on a different level, on a personal, in a physical way, and also just that I think, raise the intrinsic sort of essence of who we are as humans, and that is talking to each other face to face potentially.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm thinking more about BeWeDo rather than Aikido, because in some dojos you're not allowed to talk. So
No,
it's
really.
quite you're not allowed to talk. It's only and it's only the instructor who talks, and so I think for Aikido, it was exciting to learn, but I think what I also learned is and what the founder of Aikido believed was that 80% of Aikido happened off the mat. And so he would say, well, there's Yoshiba, but Satomi would say, the essence of Aikido is when you walk down the road or walk down a footpath and you don't bump into people. Because we don't go out to bump into people. It doesn't make any sense. So we kind of got the principles there when we walk down the street and on a busy street, we're making our way through. That's kind of very Aikido-ish. But Yoshiba would say that, you need to take these principles off the mat and apply them in other challenges in life. And so when it's whether workplace, whether it's your sex life, I've done BeWeDos with a couple talking about improving their sex life through the organizational change, challenges and well-being, through just coming up with ideas. And, I guess what the challenge for me is that as it's evolved from touch, which is a huge thing, right? It's become kind of a dangerous thing. It became very dangerous during COVID.
Yeah.
And
Touch.
so originally the idea was that you would hold someone's wrist or hold someone's wrist or tap their wrist. And, for a lot of people that can be confronting, although surprisingly, we touch people more than we realize in life, whether it be tapping someone on the shoulder saying thanks very much, or so over the years, I've lost that touch part of the new practice. But I think it'd be good. I mean, I think maybe in the future it will come back, but this idea of to humanize, the idea of a mutual communication where it's not about the ego, it's not about you and me, it's about what are we dealing with between us, whether that's a challenge, whether that's a difficult conversation. It's not with me, it's when we join together, we deal with it, and we use Aikido movements.
Yeah, it's uncanny, and I will share this with my son, but for his doctoral work 20 some years ago, and now we're doing episodes in the podcast, he focused on something very, very basic to our humanity, which is the way we talk to each other, turns of talk. And around that, he created a theory of social inaction, how what we're doing right now is creating something, first and foremost, that's never happened in all of recorded time. That what you and I are doing right now has never been done, right? Because I'm you and, you and me and all that. And so what we're trying to do is use this moment to make some meaning together. Yeah. But what that meaning making does, and this is, I'm taking his very elaborate research and maybe making it too simple, but one of the most key important factors of conversation of the sort we're doing is bond, B-O-N-D, forming social bonds. And now we've got a pair, then we have a team, and then we have an organization. But the bond doesn't happen in a flow chart or family tree or anything else. The bond happens because people spend some significant time together in exploratory conversations. And what do you think about this conversations? And how are we going to, where's the last piece to that puzzle conversations? And that helps us become us. See, I don't think AI can do that. No. We write a script into it and it gives us some feedback. But we're talking about creating meaning out of nothing and making it something. Wow. See? Yeah. So my quest in my last decade or so, hopefully a decade into my 80s, my quest is to find people like you who are very fluid in your interest in human nature and how it gets expressed organizationally, ultimately, as everything does, and come up with a few or more than a few clues for us to go by that gets us off of the same old, same old. So
I think what you're doing is really.
I can't thank you enough, Mark Bradford. This is one of my most enjoyable conversations. So I will probably chase you again for more if it's okay with you.
I've got notes for the next bit. I want to already talk about I haven't talked about gestural interfaces. We haven't talked about relational leadership. And so we can talk about that next time.
Got it. We're going to do it. Oh, so thank you again.
Pleasure. It's lovely to meet you again, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. If you'd like to hear more, go to Automatic, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube. And please consider purchasing our book on practice as a way of being at mylibrary.world. It's a digital book with lots of features that you do not see in a conventional book. So once again, thank you, and I look forward to your listening again. Oh, and one more thing. Please check out our webpage at enactionresearch.info.